Today, we'll examine 100 years of Black movies, from Gone with the Wind to blaxploitation films to Black Panther, using the struggles and triumphs of these artists and films as a prism to explore Black culture, civil rights, and racism in America. Please welcome today's speakers, Will Haygood, author and journalist and superstar, Dave Filipi, Dave Filipi, Director of Film and Video for the Wexner Center of the Arts, and our host, Ray Paprocki, publisher and general manager of the Dispatch magazines. You can learn more about today's speakers in your forum flyer. Ray, we look forward to today's conversation.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. Let me get set up here for a moment. All right, Will, Dave, good to see you. So Will Haygood and Columbus Monthly have had a relationship for quite a while, mostly him or us writing about him, his accomplishments, or printing an excerpt from one of his books, Tigerland, for instance. And during that time, I got to know Will a little bit. But it all started, of course, where things start in this city, in some cases, in the office of Larry James. Larry invited myself and Pat Lozinski, I don't know if Pat's here today from the library, and Will, to have a lunch discussion. I think The Butler was just starting to form as a movie. And so that was real exciting to get to know Will in that way. That relationship escalated about a year ago when Dave Ghosh, the editor of Columbus Monthly, approached me with a big, bold idea. And Dave is here today. I'd like to acknowledge Dave right here at the dispatch table. He said, let's do something that would devote the entire issue of the magazine to one topic. It's something we'd never done before in the history of the magazine, which dates to 1975. And that topic became to be called The Raw Reality of Living While Black in Columbus. And the other big, bold idea that Dave suggested, and again, that had never been done before in the history of the magazine, was that we needed a guest editor, someone that had the perspective and nuance of Columbus to be able to help us pull this off. We immediately had one name in mind, and only one name, and that was Will Haygood. Will, fortunately, despite working on this book, said yes. I think he said no at first, but then he said yes. Before I could get my plan in place to convince you otherwise, he came back and said, we're going to do this. So this is what the result was our May issue of Columbus Monthly, that I had some of the most memorable experiences in my career in the conversations among Dave and Will and myself, discussing what was going to be in here, where 3 hours felt like 15 minutes. And what came through to me was Will's curiosity, his passion, his compassion, his generosity, his knowledge, his insight, his sense of place, his sense of fairness, and his sense of purpose. And they all came through so strong. And reading this book, all of those things came through in Will's trademark way of deeply researched, compelling stories. So personally, this is a very cool thing for me to be a part of. So thank you for letting me be participating, and let's get to it. So, Will, can you describe the journey that led you to writing this book? How you got to the point of saying, this is what I want to do?
Yeah. First of all, thank Ray and Dave for really wanting to do in the special issue of this magazine. Friends of mine all over the country and were calling me after it came out and they read it. They were so pleasantly surprised by all of the talent that we were able to bring together between the pages of this magazine. And so Ray and Dave, you really done something special, and I was happy to be a part of it. So thank you for that. Not to name drop, but I was hanging out with Oprah. It was in Sandra Bullock's house. With Lee Daniels and Forrest Whitaker. And there was a soiree on the set of The Butler. And I was in the kitchen and just looking at the people walking around Sandra Bullock's home. You know, all this talent had gathered to make this movie about this White House butler. And there were like 7 Oscar winners in the room, and I'm looking, and I really just uttered this to myself. And I just said to myself, wow, all of this talent, white and black and young and not so old, Lenny Kravitz and Mariah Carey, Forrest Whitaker, Link from the Mod Squad, who's Clarence Williams III, who we just recently lost, you know, and Oprah and Lee Daniels. And I just said, somebody should write a book about this moment in cinematic history. And Terrence Howard, he was also in the movie, he was standing near me, and he walked around to me and he put his finger in my chest and he said, "You're the writer, so you ought to write it." And so that night, I just really started thinking about, you know, why is it so hard to get a movie with black stars made, even if you have Oprah Winfrey? I mean, studios turned her down. They just didn't want to do the movie, you know. First of all, it was a story about a black man told from the black man's perspective. Usually a story like that would have been told from the perspective of the 8 white presidents that he worked for. But Lee Daniels and the script writer, Mr. Danny Strong, they really said, no, we're going to honor Will's story. Will's story is about this man who Will found, you know, and we're going to keep the spotlight on him, you know. And so knowing how hard people had to work to raise the money to make that movie made me think of a genuine pioneer in black film history, Mr. Oscar Micheaux, who takes up a lot of this book. But he had to raise money, he had to go around the country begging, hat in hand, to get money. Hollywood paid no attention to him, you know, and he made his movies. But it was a hard trek, and, you know, still a hard trek. And so I knew if I could write the story about how movies get made and all of these various people who have a lot of passion to make movies, I knew if I could write the on-screen story and the off-screen story that it would mean something.
So when did you actually start that process?
I was working on Tigerland, which came out in 2018, but before, you know, it takes like a year for a book to be edited and all that. So actually I was finished with Tigerland like at the end of 2016, going into 2017. So, and my editor asked me what I wanted to do next, and I gave him an idea, and he asked me to come to New York and meet with him, and so we're in New York. And my first thinking was a book about 50 years of film history. And he's sitting there at the restaurant, and he hears that pitch, and then he looks up from the menu and said, no. How about 100 years? You know, and I just very silently said to myself, daggone, the dude done just doubled my work. You know, yeah, 50 years was perfect. You know, he done stretched it all out going back to 1915. You know, sort of took the air out of my balloon because I knew it was going to be a whole lot more work. But he was right. You know, he was absolutely right to start the book in 1915 with the movie The Birth of a Nation, you know, because there was a whole lot of KKK stuff in the movie where they were the heroes. All the blacks were the villains, and that movie played in theaters around the country for 4 years, The Birth of a Nation. And it was just an ad for racism. That's all it was. It was just a 3-hour ad for racism. It was taught in schools. The book that the movie was based on was taught in schools, you know, and that lasted for 4 years. And that really was the first movie where blacks rose up in mass to picket at the theaters. And, you know, that was where I started the book. And then I'm in my home in Washington, D.C., and I'm working on the book, and then Charlottesville happened. Heather Heyer, murdered in Charlottesville, Nazi march, and then there were Ku Klux Klan flags. And that literally was like, you know, heartbroken. You know, here we are, you know, here's this book that I'm working on about rabid, racist, insane people from 1915, and now, you know, here are more of those people of that ilk, you know, marching through Charlottesville, you know, like 102 years later, you know. And in a way, I just knew right then, all right, this book is going to work. This book is going to work because these are things in this country that are still simmering. Martin Luther King Jr. said it, though, people. He said, if America is destroyed, it will be destroyed from within, not from without, from within, not a foreign enemy. Martin Luther King Jr. said, America has the capability, the evil capability to destroy itself. I hope we stop that. I really do. I love the country. You know, we all do, you know, but there are bad actors in this country, and they must be stopped. They really must be stopped.
So, I'm sorry, Dave, I'm going to get to you, but I really want to pick up on this line here. So you mentioned The Birth of a Nation, and one of the points of your book is how it set sort of the narrative, right, for the rest of the country about how to view blacks.
Right.
And that cinema had such a powerful influence on that.
Right.
And then you referenced Charlottesville and this thread, right?
Yep.
So one of the things I was interested in was, as you're writing the book, events like this, like George Floyd, the Confederate, statues coming down, all of these things happening while you're writing the book. Did that influence you in how, or make you change course in any way from your original perspective of the black experience in film?
You know, the thing that I knew I had and to pay attention to was the sheer bravery of young people who would take out their cell phones in front of a police officer who was abusing somebody. That's film too. That's video. You know, and they would stand there, you know, the stress of that moment, to take a picture, to capture abuse. You know, many filmmakers did it, but not in real time, of course, you know. And so, yes, that had you know, I mean, that had a big effect on, you know, this book. I think more than anything, it really proved to me that this book needed to be written.
Speaking of that, Dave, so if you could give us some context, sort of where Will's book and the historical record of trying to document, you know, the black experience in film, can you give us some context on what came before and where Will's book may fit in?
Sure. You know, I really spent a lot of time it took me a long time to finish Will's book because I was constantly stopping, and I was reading a galley, so I didn't have all of the index to know where things were on pages and things like that, but I really spent a lot of time.
Now let us stop right there to explain what that galley is.
Oh, a pre-edited.
It's a pre-edited version of the book, you know. When I wrote my Showdown book about Thurgood Marshall, I gave my galley to Larry James and Mayor Coleman because the book was dedicated to them. And Mayor Coleman said, "What's a galley?" you know, something on a ship. You know, so no, you know, it was the sneak peek of the book before it's actually finally edited.
Yeah.
So,
and just spending a lot of time with it, you know, lots of different references that Will makes throughout the book, looking them up, spending more time, really getting a sense of it. And, you know, to put it in some context, you know, Will brings up Birth of a Nation, and, you know, I was in college in the 80s and, you know, studying film, you know, kind of my whole life since then. And if you think about a film like Birth of a Nation, which it does have its place in film history, technical innovation, and undeniably influential filmmaker in D.W. Griffith. But, you know, if a film text, if a film history book talked about the, you know, absolutely kind of unbelievable racism that's in the film, it was maybe a couple lines, of kind of rationalizing it. Well, it was 1915, and, you know, people, you know, didn't know better, or whatever the excuse was. You know, as Will just mentioned, people knew at the time it was a deeply problematic film. You know, people were protesting it. You know, there were the thought that it came out to this kind of unsuspecting American public, and people didn't know that it was very, very racist and problematic is just absolutely not true, but also it was never really, it wasn't widely written about like that. And if you take, you know, that film and just kind of, you know, keep marching through film history, I mean, Will's book ultimately serves as this alternate film history to what we, you know, if you study film, what you, and I should say also, like, there are a much more diverse array of voices and scholars and books out now than there were, you know, 40, 50 years ago. But it is this amazing kind of alternative history to what was going on in Hollywood over the course of all of these years, and how Will kind of connects these dots, you know, from Birth of a Nation to Oscar Micheaux to Hattie McDaniel to Dorothy Dandridge, to, you know, going from Oscar Micheaux, a complete maverick working outside of the system, to Melvin Van Peebles in the 60s and 70s working outside of the system. I mean, that he demonstrates that was one way for people to do it, is there's a system stacked against you. One way to get work done is to do it yourself. And there's so many themes like that that come out of Will's book that, yeah, it's just really an invaluable alternative take on Hollywood history.
And this can be for both, but I mean, I'm asked about the influence events we're having on you as you're writing book, but the reverse of that. The timing of the book is important in the racial reckoning that we're having. What do you think the alternative history, so to speak, that you would want this book to have?
You know, what has been very, I guess, heartening for me in the, very brief life of this book, it's only officially been out for 1 day. The official publication day was yesterday. But I had, in advance, sent a copy to an actor whose name I won't mention, but he told me that he thinks that this book is going to embolden and empower every black actor, actress, director, and cinematographer in Hollywood. And I hope it does. I mean, there are black heroes in Hollywood, and there are white heroes, people who tried to help Sidney Poitier early in his career, tried to help James Edwards. Men like Stanley Kramer, who was white, Ralph Nelson, who's white, good, big-hearted people. There just were not enough of them. And, it just was not enough of them. I mean, heck, face it, only this year, media-wise, just this year, we have started seeing many commercials with mixed-race couples, with black-white couples. I mean, we see it now every day, with the Cheerio commercial or the Tide commercial, hey, mom, hey, dad, and the mom and dad who walks into the room is one's black and one's white, or two men or two women. And so there was this thing in Hollywood called the Hays Code. And the Hays Code, started in the 30s, and it was ostensibly to keep nudity and frank sex talk from movies. But really, it was to keep blacks from film, black loyalty on film or black love stories, in films. And so, I hope, I hope that people in Hollywood read the book, and learn from it. It seems that it's a nice time for this story to have been told.
And Dave, at the Wexner Center, what?
Oh, go ahead.
No, please pick up.
Well, I guess one point I was going to bring up, even me saying, film history, something as white readers, white audiences, we have to come, when we think of film history, we don't say white film history. We just say film history. We say film history and then like black film history. And right there, that's problematic. And, when we're talking about film history and really meaning white film history, kind of asking those questions: who was in power, who was making these decisions, why they were making these decisions, and Will gets into it into the book in a number of places. Like and we had a guest at the Wexner Center the last couple of days, Michael Schultz, a very prolific Hollywood filmmaker, and he would be in a studio meeting with obviously white executives, and he would be talking about a film, and they say, what are we going to do with a black film? Who's going to want to see this? Just the thinking that runs throughout Will's book that leads to, again, who gets cast in films, what roles they get, what films get greenlit, what films get made. This isn't the 1930s. This is like the 1910s, and right now that artists are still dealing with this, and it's certainly better now than it was in 1950. But it's a condition and a problem that still exists.
And it matters. It really matters who we have in the White House. It matters. I mean, it matters. Under President Obama, we had the movies that came out of Hollywood when he was in the White House. Fruitvale Station, 12 Years a Slave, Mandela Lone Walk to Freedom, The Butler. There was an article that, during that time period, all those movies came out in like 2013. A black man was in the White House. And the headline of the article was, Hollywood finally gets emancipated. That's in 2013. It's like, then there was another article that came out just last year. It said, and the people who run Hollywood have left something like, I don't know, they would know about this story. It said like something like $30 billion on the floor that black audiences would go see if those movies were out. I mean, Hollywood supposedly cares about green. They always say, we don't care about black or white, we just care about green money. Nah, this study that came out, it really paints a different picture from your business perspective, that Hollywood, because it has run from diversity, has left billions on the table, billions, which is awful.
And one thing that's so exciting about with Netflix, there's certainly some bad things too, but with Netflix and Amazon and Hulu, there is this hunger for more and more content, and it is giving people of artists and creators of color many more opportunities than if they had to just go through the traditional Hollywood system and kind of work one film at a time. It's really an exciting time for people to have all kinds of opportunities and getting shows made for these different platforms. It's opening up more opportunities than have ever been there before.
Yeah, it really is. I wrote a book about the great entertainer Sammy Davis Jr. Book came out some years ago, 2003. And I got a call, not to name drop, but from Denzel Washington, who bought the rights to the Sammy book. He bought the rights. And he got in touch with me and said, hey, this is a big book, and I really don't have 2 or 3 years to go and teach a screenwriter all the nuances of the book. So I want you to write the screenplay. I said, hey, I'm game, let's get busy. So we, he would be in the city, someplace, Newark, New Jersey one time, LA one time, Washington, D.C. one time. This is funny, in Washington, D.C., we talked, and he mentioned a restaurant, a very famous, very popular restaurant downtown. And I looked at him, he said, hey man, let's go have lunch there. And I said, Denzel, man, that's a very famous place. It's lunchtime, crowded, man, we won't get in. And he shot me a look and he said, oh, yes, we will. And we got out of the limousine and the dude seen him and just said, hello, Mr. Washington, right this way. I said, oh, D, go ahead, my man, go ahead. But so he and I worked on that script for like 2.5 years. This is Denzel Washington, Oscar winner, legendary. When he went to the studios and said, hey, this is how much money I need to make this movie, the studio said, no, not unless you act in it. He didn't want to act in it. He said, I want to direct it. And the studios said no, and he called me on the phone. He said, Will, I tried, my man, I tried, and so it fell apart. But then 2 years ago, Lee Daniels, who directed The Butler, he bought the rights to the Sammy Davis Jr. book, which is right over there, and he wrote the screenplay. He's been in touch with me. He wrote the screenplay, and he just took it to Hulu. So, knock wood, it shows up on Hulu in the very near future.
But 18 years later.
Yes.
For Sammy Davis Jr.
Yeah, for Sammy Davis Jr. I mean, like, you know, writers can be paranoid. So I was at a school here in my hometown about, I don't know, shortly after the Sammy Davis Jr. book had come out. No, it was before. It was while I was working on the Sammy Davis Jr. book. I was talking to some 5th and 6th graders. And whoever was the host asked me what I was working on next. And writers are very paranoid. So you don't want to tell somebody what you're working on and fear that they might run out and do it. And I said, well, I really don't want to mention it, but I will tell you this. It's about a famous entertainer who was sort of controversial, but had a big life, and I'll leave it at that. So when it ended, the students are filing out, and this little girl, she's probably 9 or 10 years old, little blonde girl, long pigtails. She did like this to me, and she asked me to bend down, and I did, and she said, "It's Sammy Davis Jr., isn't it?" And then I said, oh my God, she's going to take my idea and going to run with it. Something's going to happen to me. I'm going to break my ankle, and then I'm going to be laid up for 2 years, and then she's going to write the book. I shouldn't have said a damn word.
So, Will, when you write a book, you live with your characters. I mean, these are people you're living with for a year or more, 2, 3 years. Who are the characters in this book that you just enjoyed living with?
Goodness gracious. I guess it would have to be Harry Belafonte, James Baldwin, because James Baldwin was a film critic. And whenever these movies would come out in the 50s or the 60s, Baldwin would find some magazine to write a so-called review. But in the review, he would veer off and he would say, none of the black people who I know act like that. It was really wonderful. Plus, I have a, very, 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 very soft spot in my heart for James Baldwin, who tried to get in the Malcolm X movie made. He went to Hollywood, he gave him his script, and I tell this story in the book. And Hollywood kept scratching out lines from his script. This is James Baldwin now, who knew Malcolm X. He said, hey, I can bring a lot to the script. So Hollywood messed with his script so much that he walked away. And it laid fallow until Norman Jewison got it, and then Spike Lee got it, of course. But the thing that I knew I was going to have a picture in this book of James Baldwin, who wasn't a movie star, but he's in the book. Really cool picture, is because when I was at the Boston Globe, and I came in one morning, I was new to the staff, and the arts editor said, hey, there's a visiting writer at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. We need you to go up and write a feature story about him. And I said, oh, okay, great. You know, who's the writer? And the editor said, James Baldwin. And I said, excuse me? You know, she said, James Baldwin. And so I hopped the train a few days later and went up there and sat with James Baldwin. And I said to myself, at the end of my chat with him, because I hadn't written one book then, not one, but I said to myself at the end of my chat, and I'm going to ask Mr. Baldwin if he thinks I someday will be able to write books. And so at the end of the conversation, I said, sir, may I ask you something? You know, he was smoking a cigarette. He was, you know, real, you know, he was, you know, inexpressive. He said, hey, baby, shoot. Yes, of course you can ask me a question. What is it? And I said, do you think, Mr. Baldwin, that someday I will be able to write books? And he was smoking a cigarette, and he said, how the hell should I know that? I have no idea what you'll be able to do in your life. You know? I have no idea. And, you know, my head dropped. I felt like running out of the room. I was just thinking, oh, wow, he's going to call the editor and tell the editor that I asked the most insane question, you know. Yeah. How's that guy on the staff, you know? But Baldwin leaned into me, and he said, hey, baby, but I tell you this, whatever you do in life, you must go the way your blood beats. Whatever you do in life, you must go the way your blood beats. Those words hang on my writing study, on the wall of my writing study to this day. I mean, so here I am 9 books later. I've gone the way my blood beats.
All right. So we're going to be moving to our questions from live stream and in-person audience in just a few minutes. If you have a question, please make your way to the microphone now. Before we take audience questions, I'll have one final question to pick up on where your blood beats. I'm going to ask you to tell an anecdote that I think will illustrate how difficult it is to do a book like this. The depth of research that's a part of it. This is not you writing sort of essays about your personal feelings about books. These are deeply researched stories. And the process sometimes of how that information comes to you. So I heard you share this earlier this week about the Sammy Davis Jr. and the California hospital. If you could relay that anecdote, if I may boil it down to, I think, close to what you said, that if you go, luck will follow.
Yep. Sammy Davis Jr. was in a car crash in 1955. Little Will Haygood was someplace in a baby crib howling in this city, because I was 1 year old. So 1955, Sammy Davis Jr. was in a car crash in San Bernardino, California. And I had just started working on the book. So I flew out to LA to live out there for like 7 months. You know, it was a whole lot of folks who knew Sammy still living out there. Actually, it was about a whole year that I lived in Los Angeles. But anyway, I got in the car one day and drove to San Bernardino because I just wanted to see how the hospital looked, how the road looked that he was taken down and to go to the hospital. So I walk into the hospital. There's like 3 nurses at the nurses station, and I tell them who I am. Will Haygood, I'm a writer. I'm working on a book about the entertainer Sammy Davis Jr., who was in a crash 3 miles down the road and was brought here that morning. And I just wanted to see the hospital and how it looks. And as I was leaving, walking out the door, I just turned around and I just said, you know, it's such a shame that all of those people from 1955 are gone. I mean, and then one of the nurses looked up and said, no, that's not true. Nurse Henderson is still around, and she was on duty that night. And I said, excuse me? She said, Nurse Henderson, she lives down the road. Here, let me call her for you. So she calls Nurse Henderson. And Nurse Henderson says to this nurse to put me on the phone. I get on the phone and she says, in a way, I've been waiting for this call all my life. What you do is go out of the driveway and make a left and go 3 miles and you'll see Red Bud Road. Turn right, I'm the first house on the left. So I run to my car and get in the car and drive to her house. And I'm sitting there with the nurse, and she's talking to me about Sammy Davis Jr., the look on his face, the scars on his face, all the questions he was asking. I was writing it down. She's telling me, she said, it was such intricate surgery, eye surgery. And we had one of the best eye surgeons. We were lucky in this state. In Dr. Fred Hall. And he was just wonderful. He explained it to Sammy. Then he did the surgery. It took about 3 hours. He was so great. And I said, my goodness, wow, I'm so happy that I found you. This Dr. Fred Hall, are any of his kids, his children around? And she said, why would you want to talk to them? He lives 4 miles down the road. And I said, wait a minute. Fred Hall, who did the surgery, is still with us? And she said, oh, honey, I'll get him on the phone for you. And so she picked up the phone and dialed Fred Hall, and he said, Will, you leave Nurse Henderson's driveway and you make a right, and then you go 2.5 miles, and then you make another left, and then that's me. And it's the only house. It's a very rural area. And so there I am with Dr. Fred Hall. You know, I don't know, he was in his mid-80s. He was a very young doctor then at the time, very famous. Anyway, and I'm talking to him, and I said, Doctor, even all this that you have told me, it's going to be sort of hard for me because I'm not a medical writer to kind of explain all of this about the eye, all about the terminology, to explain all this in the book. I said, but I'm going to try to do my best to explain that surgical, how it happened. And he said, I think I can help you there because I kept a file, a notebook that says Sammy Davis Jr. eye surgery. And he asked me if I would like to see it. Yes. He said, hold on a minute. And he went to his attic and he came back with a big yellow folder and said Sammy Davis eye surgery, and all these terms that I don't even know how to pronounce, and I could throw them into the book. And so that's why the scene of Sammy Davis's surgery sounds so authoritative, because I got it right from the doctor's notes. right from the doctor's notes. And so I teach at my alma mater, Miami University, and I all the time tell my students, if you go, something will happen. If you go, don't be a telephone reporter. You know, get out, get up off your seat and just go. Even if it's just seeing how something looks or a road, you know, just knock on the door, what I call old-fashioned shoe leather.
Thank you, Will. All right, it's time for CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. Jane Scott of CMC is curating questions from the live stream audience. For our in-house audience, please join Jane at the microphone. Please keep your questions brief and to the point.
I'm Carol Looper, and my question is, Confederate statues have been taken down in the South. Now we're hearing that in New York City, the City Council has voted to take down the statue of Thomas Jefferson. How do you feel about that?
The statues, of course, all over this country that honored slave owners, that honored people who led armies to attack this country, should be taken down. I think, now that's not saying that they shouldn't be studied, or why they were put up. And at the outset, a lot of these statues started rising in the 1920s, 1930s, but I think that the statues are used to reinforce racism. I mean, they just simply are. I mean, I like to see more statues of Rosa Parks, W.E.B. Du Bois. We have very, very, very few of those type statues in this country. And I think, too, we saw it in Washington, D.C., in insurrection. I mean, we're still in shock in Washington, D.C., because every day there's something on the news about it. Video footage, this angle, and the sheer insanity of that. I mean, we just lost a great patriot in this country yesterday, General Colin Powell. That's patriotism. Those people who charged the U.S. Capitol, it was a white-led mob who now start screaming to their lawyers, I was a patriot, I was called there to save the country. No, you weren't. No, you weren't. You were trying to deny 8 million black voters from those swing states. You were trying to deny their right to have their votes counted, Something else that's, very dangerous right along with those monuments is this race theory stuff that's going on. It's an excuse for people to not teach slavery or not teach subjects that we need to be taught to learn. Look, you don't have gangrene and you don't say, hey, you know what? I don't think I'm gonna talk about that gangrene in my leg. I think it might upset my wife. I'm just gonna let it fester. No, you don't do that. If we don't talk about things in this country, I do believe that Martin Luther King had a lot of currency when he said that this country has the ability to destroy itself. I was a foreign correspondent, and I traveled all over the world. All my foreign friends think that this country has lost its mind. They do. I got friends in India, Egypt, South Africa, West Africa. They really think that this country is falling apart. I mean, we put a reality TV star, a nutcase, next to the nuclear bomb. I mean, a nutcase, a real misogynist, racist nutcase. I mean, you know, we put that man in the White House. You know, you all have relatives, I'm sure, who voted for him. You need to educate them. You really do. I mean, it's mind-blowing that that man was in the White House. You know, mind-blowing. But people in this state helped him. They helped him get there. This is a blood red state now. All my friends ask me about it, you know, and it's heartbreaking. Fortunately, this city is blue, you know. Fortunately, yep. Very proud of that, but, you know, I mean, we put a lunatic in the White House. You know, historians are going to have to deal with that. Next, okay, Mayor Coleman.
I don't know what else to say. You said it all. I want to make a comment and then a question. My comment is to applaud you for a lot of reasons. I've known you for a long time now. But what I applaud you for is you have never forgotten the city. You have never forgotten where you came from. You're now an international celebrity, national celebrity, and influencer, but you always keep your hometown your hometown.
Yes, I do.
You always come back. You always open your books here first, and you come back not just for that, but just to reconnect and be in the place that raised you.
Yep.
So I applaud you for that. And I wish others would do that around the country. Yeah. The question is, you have spoken about how politicians, in particular Barack Obama, influenced film.
Yes.
And black film. Can we reverse that a little bit? How has black film influenced the political agenda in the country? Just to start you out, I did not realize until about 10 years ago who Woodrow Wilson really was. But I just want to raise that and ask you to respond to the question of film impacting politicians or the political environment of our nation.
Yeah. Mayor, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, too, for always caring about my books and the subjects that I write about. It really means a whole lot to me. It was easy to come home during your years in office. I must say that. It was very easy. And we now have a mayor who has been very warm-hearted and open-minded toward me and the type of work that I do. I'm very thankful that Mayor Ginther, that he cares about the subjects that I write about. I think, Mayor Coleman, I think that anytime there is a movie with a large black cast or a black leading man, you know, there's a great line in the book. And I hope I can find this. It's like something in that James Baldwin said. You know, it's never just a movie. It's always like in the person who is black in these movies happens to be teaching, because whites judged blacks how we are or not are. So many whites judge blacks by the blacks that they see in movies, you know? And so there's a great line here, but from James Baldwin that says all of that, Mayor. If I can find it real quick. Okay, I'm close. Yikes, there's a lot of bold mentions in the book. Okay, I'm gonna try page 245. I think it's there. Wait a minute, if I don't. Nope, it's not there. Okay, wait a minute. I think I got it, 208. Hold on. And I love this so much. No, it's not there. 149. Okay, well, I just can't find it. But you know what? He said, and I'll paraphrase it. He said, when the black actor, black actress is on screen, they often sneak a little authenticity into their performances. They often veer off script, and they do something so authentic, so real, that it will, make somebody, like a Larry James, in the middle of the night say, that was a bit of subterfuge, that black actor was able to do that because they were dealing with a white screenwriter, white director, white producer, and they wanted to put some of themselves in the movie, and they would do that. I mean, something else finally. How do I get to write books about Sammy Davis Jr.? And because there wasn't a major biography about Sammy Davis Jr. when I started. Sugar Ray Robinson wasn't a major biography about Sugar Ray Robinson when I started. Thurgood Marshall's Senate confirmation hearings wasn't a book about Thurgood Marshall's hearings when I started. East High School, 2 state championships, a remarkable story, but nobody had ever written about it. This, 100 years, nobody had ever written this story. I'm fortunate that my editor, who is white, is one of the most woke people in this country. And the wonderful Peter Gethers, he flew here, he's been here in town for the past 2 days. Loved the city, by the way, loved the restaurant. He and I went out to Lindy's, he had some lamb chops, he loved it. And so, I'm fortunate to be with a woke editor, who understands the type of stories that I want to write, because these stories haven't been written. I kind of feel like I'm just trying to catch up. The scales aren't balanced literature-wise. The scales aren't balanced, and I'm just trying to tell stories that I think need to be told.
Wish we had more time, I really do. But we'll turn it back to Tony Bell for concluding remarks.
Thank you to our online virtual seat patrons and to the Columbus Dispatch for supporting today's forum. And thank you to today's sponsors, Crabbe, Brown & James, LLP, and RAMA Consulting Group. Thank you to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. And our special appreciation to today's speakers, Will Haygood. Round of applause. David Filipi. And our host, Ray Paprocki. And our special guest, Mayor Michael B. Coleman. Thank you for joining us. We certainly could not do this without each and every one of you. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at the Columbus Metropolitan Club and as we present another community conversation. Be safe, be well.